Welcome to Business Life Extra, the show that focuses on business leaders and entrepreneurs fueling Jamaica's economic boom. International investors are increasingly looking to invest here as the nation enjoys a sustained period of growth, having become a model for heavily indebted nations to chart a path to success. My guest this week has transitioned from banking to driving down the cost of energy right here in Jamaica. The high cost of power is one of the biggest barriers to profitability. She's on a mission to change that by creating the island's largest solar energy park. Paradise Park is expected to reduce carbon emissions by 30,000 tons annually. That's equivalent to taking 7,400 cars out of commission for a year. The yearly output from the plant is expected to average 82 gigawatt hours of power. It will supply power to the national grid at 8.5 US cents per kilowatt hour under a 20-year PPA agreement. That's a power purchase agreement with grid operator Jamaica Public Service Company, JPS. Angela, welcome to the show.
Mark, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming to Business Life Extra. It's great to have you. So who is Angela Rainford?
Who is Angela Rainford? Wow, it's a pretty in-depth question. So I am Jamaican national, born and raised here. Spent a lot of beginning of my career really working in banking, and have, as you mentioned before, just made the transition to energy, to the renewable energy sector. Who's Angela Rainford? I guess I'm still figuring that out myself, and hopefully still defining that.
And why did you decide to leave banking?
I think for some people, banking is basically their main career, where they'd like to be. For me, I always knew it was going to be a stepping stone. So hopefully a training ground where I would learn certain skills I would be able to use elsewhere and to develop something else. I chose to leave it because I'd always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I ran a company in college, which I really enjoyed. And after a while, when you keep saying you're an entrepreneur, but you look at yourself in the mirror and you're still going to the same banking job, you have to make a decision whether or not you're going to transition. And at that point, that's the decision I made.
Okay. And where in banking and finance, did you work globally or here in Jamaica?
So I haven't worked in Jamaica until now, which is definitely quite a learning lesson. Mm-hmm. But I've worked in New York and I worked in London. So I started my banking career. I worked at Goldman Sachs in their private principal investment area, which is their merchant banking division. Okay,
terrific. And what are you doing now presently, in Jamaica?
So in Jamaica, what we're doing is we're basically developing renewable energy projects. There's one that we've just developed, which is now officially launched and opened, and we're looking to do a lot more. I think it's really exciting because the Caribbean region as a whole, and especially Jamaica, is basically we're at the point where we're developing a new industry, and it's an industry of change. And there's a major transition that's basically going on globally, and we're becoming a part of that.
Great. And last week, we are well known for this. Last week you opened up actually at Paradise Park, down in Westmoreland, right. 8 Rivers, which you just spoke towards, with the Prime Minister. Everybody, just tell us about it and what is 8 Rivers Energy Company?
So 8 Rivers Energy Company is a solar project. 8 Rivers Energy Company is the holding company for the asset. It is a 51 megawatt peak solar plant. It's based in Paradise Park. We are generating power, which we're selling to the grid. And we are providing Jamaica with its cheapest source of electricity, which is something I'm super excited about.
Okay. And that's the 8.5 cents at the top of the show?
Exactly. That's the 8.5 cents. So if you look at your energy bill, you're probably paying anywhere between 20 to 30 plus cents per kilowatt hour. It's been as high as in the 40s, especially when oil prices were higher. And so if you think about, to put 8.5 cents into perspective, it's a fraction of pretty much what we are still paying today.
Right. And so, take us back to finance. Some would say in Jamaica, the Caribbean, you're the darling of Goldman Sachs. You're coming out of, that system and everything. How did you end up at Goldman Sachs? If you took us through, that period of your career.
Okay, so I joined Goldman Sachs pretty much before and after business school. I started my career working at McKinsey, which is a consulting firm. But I always liked transactions, execution, and if I'm completely honest with you, I was a huge fan of the movie Wall Street.
Okay. Yeah.
So that whole world, that genre, especially at school, they talk a lot about it. And if you're inclined to be interested in the stock market and Wall Street, banking is kind of the career and stepping stone that you would choose. I ended up getting into it, one, because of other friends who were looking at the sector. But especially because I was interested in markets and what drove growth and the economy.
And what was different between working at McKinsey and Goldman Sachs for you? And you know, what did you learn, you know, especially for our viewers?
So there's learnings from each one. The skill sets are slightly different. So at McKinsey, which is a consulting firm, you learn how to problem solve. So you learn how to break down large problems into smaller problems. And to be honest, that's a skill set I even use to develop the Paradise Park project, because it's one big issue, but then you try and think of what are the tiny bits and pieces which I can break down, and you make it into something manageable. Consulting, you're advising someone else. You're advising a client as to what you think they should do and helping them to find your strategy. In banking, especially the group I worked for, which was the private equity division, you're focused on the investment side. So you're actually more transactional. You're executing projects. You're investing. You're making decisions on risk and how do you assess risk. So they're very different skill sets, but they're mutually complementary.
And has 8 Rivers, you know, in 8 Rivers, are you an operator? Is it a private equity transaction? You know, you mentioned holding company earlier. What is 8 Rivers for Angela?
So it's a little bit of both. So I'm a developer. It's actually kind of, to go back to your earlier question, who is Angela Rainford? It's actually quite comforting to say I'm a developer.
Okay.
Because you kind of find your place, especially when you decide to be an entrepreneur. So it's a bit of both. So at the beginning, we basically pulled together the project. So my role was I brought in the capital investments. So I found my strategic partner, which was NEON, a French IPP, convinced them that they should invest in Jamaica, invest in this project.
What's an IPP?
So an IPP is an independent power producer.
Okay.
So they are the producers who sell to the grid in this case, and then basically the grid operator, JPS in Jamaica's case, would then distribute the power to the consumer.
Right.
So in terms of the roles, there's a role of, think of it as like real estate development. Someone needs to find the land. Someone needs to come up with an idea of what are you going to use the land for, and then you need the money to make it happen. When you come to that point where you need to pull together the capital to make it happen, that's more of a private equity role, because at that point now you're on the other side of the investment. You're not necessarily the investor, but you can have to convince other people to invest in the project. And then on the operational side, I'm not operating the plants. I was not out there constructing it. But there are roles and elements of assistance which I was able to give and support to our project in terms of ensuring that things are cleared through the ports, dealing with our tax incentives, labor, thinking through the right mix as well of labor, so all of that.
So at some point you kind of hand over, you hand over the project, or so let's say, but you maintain some equity or some stake in the company that you've helped build.
Correct. So I'm still a shareholder, other than the shareholder for NEON, the main shareholder. I'm the second largest shareholder, which is kind of cool to say. There are, for a number of the other IPPs, barring obviously the ones such as Wigton, which has now gone public, there aren't many local owners of these projects. And so it's really nice to have a project where there is a local owner, because I think our perspective is a little bit different. It's not just a perspective of capital, return on capital invested, but it's also thinking through the issues of it's our country, looking for long-term sustainable growth, and approaching it in that fashion. You
know, you mentioned local owners. I mean, at times there's been articles also about having, you know, females on boards, females in executive positions. Has it been a challenge also being a female entrepreneur and being, as you said, a second largest owner, being in such a substantial equity position? Has it been challenging, or has it been easy kind of getting the project together and getting to where you are today?
Right. No, that's a fair question. I try not to think about it. I have been approached by other, younger women who are saying, how do you manage to do it? Because it's a very male-dominated industry. I mean, that's a fact.
Just energy globally?
Energy, period. Energy globally, but finance is a very male-dominated industry, and that's where I came from. So in a way, I'm kind of used to playing the rugby match with the boys, even though you're the one girl or lady there. I'm the current chairperson of the board as well. We rotate it between main shareholders. But I try, the advice I usually give to young women is try not to think about being a woman, or if you do think about it, think of it as an advantage. Don't view it as a disadvantage. We all have advantages and disadvantages. If you, in your mind, believe that being a woman is a disadvantage, sometimes your belief then becomes reality.
If there's any, same thing, if there's any young lady looking to branch out, or just any lady at all to jump out of the banking sector or jump into the entrepreneur challenging world, any advice for them?
Right. Well, first advice, if that's what you want to do, you should at least give it a chance. Part of the reason why I left, one of the early questions going, why did I leave banking, or what was it that made me think about leaving? I want to be, when I'm old and gray, hopefully I make it to being old and gray, I don't want to have that regret of not having tried something. And for me, it's a bigger regret for not trying than to try and to fail, and then you try again, you keep trying again. So for the women looking to make that leap of faith, if you believe in yourself, then you should go for it. It's not necessarily a straight road, and a piece of advice that I was given at the time was normally you have ups and downs. But if you remember that it's kind of a line going up. So even though you're at that trough at that moment, just bear with it because you're going in the right direction in the end. So hopefully that's the piece of advice that someone else can use.
And, you know, regardless of what college you go to university, they always say when you come home or you come back to Jamaica, people always identify with your high school. And you went to a famous high school here, Campion.
Yep.
You know, how much would you say Campion has made Angela into who she is today?
A lot. Definitely. They've contributed a lot. I mean, Campion is a school of discipline, high achievers, excellence, and really trying to be the best that you can. I will also give a call out to my primary school, Mona Prep, where the motto is, I think it still is, I serve. And I think that between the combination of the two, one which is focused on excellence and being the best, and it's a very competitive school, and the other which reminds you that we're here to serve in a way that whatever you do it to the best of your ability, but you do it in a way that also helps to contribute to others.
Has it, would you say, in hindsight, has it helped you find any local investors? Do you have any local investors in your projects as well?
So I do. So basically I had to syndicate some of my shares to raise my share of the equity for the project. And we do have Grace Kennedy Pension Fund, which is invested in the project. And that was one of the first at the time because pension regulation was such that we had to ensure that we structured the project to be compliant while still allowing and enabling a local pension fund to invest in infrastructure asset. And these assets is very normal for the pension community globally to own these assets. They're usually the ultimate beneficiary because they're long-dated, inflation-hedged assets. And I still remember sitting around the table with the Grace Kennedy guys just trying to figure out, okay, how do we structure this? Because we want exposure, but we need to ensure that we're compliant with pension rules.
And how, you know, persons say you're very adventurous. You know, you like banking, you know, biking and a number of things. How would energy is supposed to be boring, you know, solar power boring. How does your personality match up with your investment acumen?
I think it's anything but boring, especially the development side of it, because it's risk. So you're right, I do like biking, so I'm avid motorcyclist. I do climbing as well, but it's all calculated risk. It's not going out there gangbuster and hoping for the best without thinking through what are the potential outcomes. And
you really look at energy, solar energy being very similar.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we had to find the land. It was almost like in the James Bond movie when we were trying to find the land, because I came with the CEO of Neo1, who was my co-investor, co-development partner. Before they signed on, the CEO came down from Paris, and he brought a gentleman in from Australia, and I had secured, in principle, a couple pieces of land. And one by one, the night before, each one went away. I mean, one guy decided to give it to someone else. The other one, it just, things happen.
So, if you walk us through that, you know, like what's the roundhouse of companies? I mean, you know, I know you've mentioned you have a few businesses, but you know, you have 8 Rivers. But what's the roundhouse of companies that makes, you know, this all click? And in the early days, I mean, what were the challenges just to get business going in Jamaica to this, you know, outstanding achievement that you've got to know? Okay,
so the roundhouse of different companies that are involved. So 8 Rivers Energy Company is the holding company of the asset. And then above that, when we first developed the project, it was my company was a shareholder, Recamniar, and Neo1, which is a French independent power producer, IPP. And so we formed a joint venture, 8 Rivers Energy Company, which we also call ERIC, to develop the project.
Okay.
So those are the original three companies. In terms of challenges to get it done, the number one challenge when I started, I'd never developed an energy project before, and I didn't have the technical expertise nor the capital. So normally you would say, okay, if you don't have either of those, then you're probably starting back and you probably shouldn't be doing it. But again, I guess coming back to the McKinsey principles of here's a big problem, let's break it down into little problems. So let's find a financial partner. Let's find a strategic who has the technical expertise. And so I started going through my network, and I was introduced by one of the MDs I used to work for, Goldman, to the owner of Neo1 at the time. And he sent it on to his CEO, and I pitched them.
And that was a financial or the strategic?
It was both. 2 in 1. 2 in 1, Mark. Yeah, I tried to nail them both at once. And basically I pitched them just saying, hey, this is a country where you should be investing. Here's a sector that makes sense. We don't need subsidies in the Caribbean. And they took a chance. Yeah, I mean, not everyone was convinced, I will say. There are a couple of guys who were not so sure. But the CEO, the one driving the decision, he wanted to take a chance.
Okay, and the red carpet in Jamaica, what was it like? Amazing? All the agencies, everything?
The red carpet, it was mixed. But for most part, because it's an investment of I would view it as national interest to help bring down energy costs, we got a lot of support.
And you got it done?
Yeah, we got it done.
Excellent.
Yeah.
We're now going to go to our first break for Business Live Extra. Welcome back to Business Live Extra. We're talking to Angela Rainford, an entrepreneur who gave up a career in investment banking to commit to green energy. Adopting renewable energy can reduce greenhouse gas emissions that contribute to climate change. Jamaica emits just 0.02% of global emissions, but renewable energy is vital to help adapt to a changing climate and to boost the local economy. By going green, Jamaica can also become more resilient. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So, Angela, when we talk about green energy,
right.
What is it, and, how would you define it? It's all over Bloomberg, super popular, and, even myself and probably most people just don't understand it.
So green energy would be renewable energy. I think they've moved it from being just renewables because there are other types of fossil fuels which they're classifying to some extent as green. But my definition of green energy would be something that is sustainable, something that we have naturally. So, for instance, hydro for water, wind power, solar power. These are things that we don't have to dig up or look for. They're pretty much readily available.
And do we actually have, besides solar, which we have a lot in Jamaica and we read
right.
about, it's in low-income housing schemes, it's in middle-income housing, but do we have other sources? Like, do we have hydro in Jamaica? Do we have other green, sources of energy?
No, absolutely. I mean, basically, Jamaica, we have some of really, really old hydro plants that are still active over 40 years. Those tend to be owned by JPS. We've been trying to look at biomass, so cogen facilities. So cogeneration is something that you can find with sugarcane plantations. So basically, they use the bagasse, and they basically will use that as a source of power to basically emit green energy.
Is that kind of like what Jamaica Boilers, has had in the past, or they still have maybe?
I think they had more of an ethanol plant. It's a little bit different, but okay. But some of the I know they've been looking into it, but maybe some of the the rum producers could be looking at doing more of a biomass facility.
And kind of some of the popular ones we've seen, Wisynco announced they're going to have an LNG plant. Is LNG green, or is that not green?
I'm a bit more of a purist. For me, I wouldn't say that's green. There are other people who would argue it's green. It's definitely more green than heavy fuel oil or automotive diesel oil. But at the end of the day, LNG, natural gas, is still something that we need to dig up. It's something we need to pipe, something we need to take from another source.
So for the layman, like LNG versus green, is it like being vegan versus raw vegan, or?
It's more like being pescatarian than being vegetarian, or vegan versus vegetarian.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's still like a debate, or a global debate.
It's a bit of
in terms of what's green.
Yeah, definitely. I think green energy to some extent is a bit of also marketing. There's an element of marketing to it. So, but if you're really looking at something that's coming from the earth and something that's renewable, not something we're taking out that we need to find some way to put back, then that would be hydro, solar, wind.
And do you see the whole green concept as being, is it like a .com bubble, or is it something that you think could be here, a decade from now, 20 years? Is this a long-term strategy?
I think it's a long-term revolutionary shift. That's my opinion. I mean, we've had major things like the Industrial Revolution. You have all these key changes in time, and my view is that this is something that is with us to stay.
Okay, and we've seen it on a lot of media houses globally, Financial, Reuters, etc. That companies raising 100 billion US, or countries doing a green bond,
right?
And they have to still pay interest. But in a lot of these cases, where, just explain to us, where does the revenue come from?
For renewable projects.
Yeah, for these projects that are maybe non-solar projects, but some of these more innovative ones, like, I don't know, clean air or other clean energy projects? Where does the revenue come from to pay these maybe coupons or these interest?
I can't really comment on all of them. To be honest, I'm not really certain where all of their revenue is coming from. I mean, for our types of projects, the revenues are coming from selling ultimately to the consumer. So we're generating energy, and it needs to be used by someone, and someone's paying for that energy.
So you have real cash flow.
You have real cash flow. Exactly. Right. There's no subsidies. So in some markets, there are government subsidies, which are encouraging the adoption of these technologies, and it's partly because they may have real concerns around carbon emissions or quality of air. And so they're making a conscious effort to encourage this industry. But in the Caribbean region, it's as pure as selling, an item that someone else wants. To do. And exactly.
So, and carbon credits would be in it as well?
Not in our project. So we didn't actually factor in carbon credits. The carbon credit market has been volatile, and it's constantly changing. So we have not factored that in as a revenue stream, but I know it can be looked at, and it has been looked at in the past. So
that's more for the Goldman Sachs traders and the commodities traders?
Yeah, we're more on the exactly. I guess on that side, we're more on the operation side. But you do have owner-operators also trading the carbon credits from their project, but that's not something that we're currently doing.
And do you think, in Jamaica, we have a lot of, obviously, tourism is now like number one. It was always number 2, 3. Yeah. Bauxite has declined. Remittances is right up there in the top 3. Do you see the green sector potentially, moving up the totem pole long term?
I wouldn't. I see green sector moving up in terms of facilitating those sectors. I wouldn't necessarily see it as its own in that bucket, because energy filters through everything. So if you think through our tourism industry, even the mining industry could benefit from having renewable energy as part of its energy mix.
All right. So, with New Fortress raising a whopping $180 million US, secured, unsecured, or however that works. Do you see that again being a part of this trend? LNG is a part of it. So more energy companies coming into Jamaica or the Caribbean.
Right. So there is a debate with this, as there always is. But for most part, LNG is used as an intermediary fuel, especially for people who would like to see us moving at some point 100% renewables. One of the issues with renewables is the intermittency of it. So solar obviously is not there all the time. Wind is not consistent all the time. But battery storage, energy storage, I always say this in the future, but increasingly it's kind of the now. So as the price of that technology and the efficiency of those technologies improve, then one would hope that at some point we should reach that kind of glory point where you could be 100% renewable. But you're going to need a factor of energy storage that will allow you to give baseload power, which we currently don't have right now compared to LNG.
Right. And you mentioned some of the hydro plants in Jamaica. Do you see, to your knowledge, are these profitable? Are these potentially profitable if they could be redone? Are there other opportunities that, could be rehabilitated in Jamaica? So
there are, to my knowledge, there are some hydro assets which are in need of rehabilitation. For most part, those belong to JPS. And so it'd be interesting to see if they look to rehabilitate those assets. There are hydro assets which we haven't even tapped into yet. And so on the development side of it, it's a lot more challenging than solar. Hydro, you tend to have the land where it's actually located. It's not as easy to say, look, I want this discrete parcel which is owned by X landowner. You're talking about areas of bush, as we say in Jamaica, where you might not even be able to find the owners. But it's definitely one of potential, and it adds to the mix. I think the main thing is I wouldn't suggest that the country go 100% solar or 100% of one thing. But if you're able to diversify across the range of green energy, however you define it, it's only a positive thing.
And 8 Rivers, you've had this successful project, which again you opened last week with the government, Westmoreland. Is this a one-off thing, or do you see 8 Rivers branching out and doing more green projects or energy projects in Jamaica?
Right. So we're already looking at developing additional projects. It may not be under the 8 Rivers umbrella, because 8 Rivers was a specific special purpose vehicle, so an SPV, set up to hold the Paradise Park asset. But I've signed with my French partners for us to work together again, and so we are in discussions with landowners and securing sites. What we are waiting on is a mandate from the government and from the procurement entity, and that has not yet been released.
In terms of anything you could disclose, will it just be isolated to solar, or could it be other, potential sectors within energy in Jamaica?
Potentially other sectors, but for most part, solar is our focus.
Is your focus.
Absolutely.
And does solar branch out into different tiers or different parts, or is solar just a panel, or the panels that we all know?
No, it can branch out. So I mean, basically, so Recamnier is my company, which focuses on the utility scale projects, and that's the one which has developed the Eight Rivers Park. I started a second company, which is called Soleco Energy. And what that company does is we're looking more at the commercial and industrial part of the market. This is what they call decentralized power, so distributed power, DG, distributed generation. In that sector with solar, you can use solar obviously for electricity generation, but one big topic that's starting to be in dialogue is e-mobility, so electric vehicles. And how does that come into play, and how do we filter that into our system?
We have those in Jamaica?
We do have a few.
I know there's a JPS one on the building.
Yeah,
or the
exactly.
Second, but do we actually have them on the roads?
I think they're probably countable on two hands, to my knowledge. But there's a push, and there's increasingly discussion around it. And how do we prevent Jamaica from becoming a dumping ground for all of those old vehicles that no one else in the world will want at some point? Mm-hmm. Because increasingly fleets are all shifting to EV, but there's going to be a transition period. And so to answer your question about what other ways that you could use solar, technology exists and it's being further defined and refined, where you could probably even use that for charging infrastructure.
Excellent. Can a Tesla vehicle function in Jamaica now?
I think it could. I'm not certain about the economics, how expensive it would be, but being on an island, range anxiety is not as much of an issue as being in the United States. Range anxiety basically means being worried that you're going to run out of the power before you get to your destination. So
if you set up your own plug and play or something like that, you could do it on your own.
You should be able to do it on your own.
Interesting. Okay. Why do you think we haven't seen a Tesla car out there?
I think combination of a number of things. One would probably be costs. It's still very expensive. So one of the questions or one of the challenges I would pose to the administration is, how do you think through the taxation of an electric vehicle versus a classic fossil fuel car? And I think in Barbados, there are certain tax incentives that are given, which will allow you to bring in an electric vehicle versus your classic, gas vehicle. So that's one thing. And so I think that is changing, definitely.
Okay. And, over the last, week or so, the Prime Minister has been at a lot of events, Korea, UN, climate change. I mean, you have this green bond they've mentioned, for listing on the Jamaica Stock Exchange, listing 19% of JPS, shares on the stock exchange. I mean, and a few other announcements. How does this make you all feel, being a, energy specialist? It's
moving. That's always a good thing. Just progress. I think having the green bond, I don't know all the particulars of it because I just saw the announcement as well today, but it shows that there is a key drive of the administration to be more green, as you call it, to be cognizant of climate change and how do we affect that. For us, it's a positive because...
Is it creating buzz, buzz for you as well?
I think so. I think absolutely. I think what would be more concerning is if the announcements were things such as, we are not doing any more renewables, we are we want to do coal or something like that. I think if those were kind of the announcements which you are seeing in some countries, I mean, for instance, in the United States, they're really trying to keep their coal industry going, that would be a lot more of a concern to a renewable energy developer.
Okay. And I mean, do you, just as someone that's independent, I mean, do you view this as ways that they can pay down debt to GDP as well? I mean, is it, good economics? Is it a mix of things probably driving it?
I think it's a mix of things. I mean, ultimately, it seems as though the government is on a drive to privatize key assets. So sometimes you have governments who want to nationalize everything, then you have many governments who want to privatize everything, and then you have this spectrum in between. I think what I would hope for is that the funds that they're able to raise is that it's used wisely, right? Okay. I mean, at the end of the day, you're selling something, you're going to get cash for it, but you need to reinvest in something else.
And, would your company also look at, I mean, what about like waste to energy? Is that a viable option for Jamaica, you think?
So my view on waste to energy is it's more of a waste management issue. The waste to energy is that's a sideshow. That's not the main event. That's like your appetizer versus your main course.
Like you have to crawl before you walk, you mean?
Yeah, you have to solve the waste issue, because if you don't have an organized way of managing the waste, separating the waste, then the waste to energy plant doesn't really make any sense. You can't build a plant without having something to put into it to then generate the energy. So again, my view there would be first solve the waste issue, let's have a landfill rather than a dump, because a dump isn't something that you can easily add a waste to energy plant and say, ta-da, we've solved the issue. So that's more of and it's a big challenge, that's more of the challenge that you want to do first, and then you can look at waste energy.
And do you, Angela, I mean, does 8 Rivers, do you have competitors in Jamaica now? I mean, are there international competitors? Are there any local competitors? You have dominated the headlines. I mean, is there anyone else out there right now who rivals you?
Of course, there are competitors. There are competitors who came before us and beat us.
Who comes to mind?
So there's obviously, BMR Energy, which has an investment from Richard Branson, so they're a competitor.
That's a big name.
Yeah, of course. Richard Branson is a huge name.
Now opening Virgin Hotels, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You have WRB, which is an American family, who I think were in the banking industry before. Wigton, in a way, is a competitor, but they're also a friendly one because they're the state. Well, they were the state until recently.
But you seem to really be out there. Are there CEOs as strong as you, or out there as much as you?
It's funny you say I'm out there. I think maybe I stand out more, but I wouldn't necessarily say I'm out there more. But there are not many. There are no women, right? For a start.
So those companies are kind of male. They're male-led again.
Yes, they're male-led, with the exception of Wigton. They're all internationally led. So they're American guys who are basically leading those companies. So I think you're going to stand out if you're, the one Jamaican lady who's there. What I mean? It's going to stick out. But I think as well, our project, compared to, let's say, the previous solar project, we are twice the size, right? We're twice as big. We're the largest in English-speaking Caribbean. And the thing I'm most proud of, we're the cheapest. Our price really has set a new bar for where energy prices of any source, whether it's solar, wind, hydro, gas, we've set the bar as to where you need to get to.
Excellent. So we've got a value for money story as well as a Jamaican-led story in 8 Rivers. And we take another break on Business Live Extra. We'll find out what's next for Angela Rainford and her new company, Soleco, when we return. Welcome back to Business Live Extra. The renewable energy industry is one of the fastest growing in the world. It's sometimes referred to as the clean or green energy and refers to solar, wind, and hydro generation. Investment in the industry has surpassed $228 billion globally. Jamaica is making some progress. Renewables account for between 15 and 20% of the energy supply. The government has set a target of 50% of energy use generated from renewable sources by 2030. Angela, we return to Business Live Extra. How practical do you think that is? I mean, can the government really hit that percentage by 2030? I mean, or is it another vision 2030?
Right.
No, I mean, what do you think about it?
No, that's a fair question. I think one of the core elements that will have to change or be integrated will be energy storage, as mentioned earlier. Most of the renewable energy sources are intermittent, and you can't reasonably expect to have 50% of your grid coming from intermittent sources. That just isn't viable. It's not stable. But
what's an intermittent source?
So intermittent means that, it's solar. If a cloud goes over the solar plants, then it drops. You actually lose some of the production. Likewise with the wind, if the wind isn't blowing, then you're not going to get the energy being produced. But there are ways in which technology is improving where you can mitigate that, where you can basically, you store a little bit of the power, the excess power that you generate, such that when you have that drop, you basically dispatch the power during that period of time. So you won't actually see that, you'll just see a straight line. So that's super exciting. I think what we need to do now is get down the cost of that technology, but it's going in that direction. It has to go in that direction. To get to 50% by 2030, I think it's also an economic question, not just a technologically viability question. So because we have invested quite heavily recently in gas, LNG terminals and facilities, and so in the next 10 years, are you going to just decommission a portion of that? Most likely not. So I think it's a good goal to have because it forces the debate. It forces needing to put more renewables on the energy system. But ultimately, what do we want? We want low cost and we want resilient and sustainable supply.
You know, 8.5 cents seems so reasonable already. Do you feel like you can go actually even lower?
I think it depends on the number of factors, but that is a possibility.
Okay.
Solar prices have continued to decline, not as much as they had in the past. One of the big unknown factors is interest rates, because a lot of the pricing comes with cost of capital. It's a cost of capital question. So if interest rates increase significantly, then investors are going to want a higher return to justify the investment, and that will filter through into the pricing. So what we've done with the 8 Rivers projects is we kind of caught it at it's almost like a beautiful nexus of things where the cost of technology dropped, efficiency improved, and also we're at one of the lowest interest rate environments that we've been in recent history.
And so although your partner's overseas, I mean, have you been refinancing or doing more deals in Jamaican dollars, given what you just said?
So we have not. Our debt is coming in from 2 multilaterals. So we have US dollar debt from the French Development Bank and the Dutch Development Bank. But it doesn't mean that we can't look at that, but that's not something currently on the table.
It's not a priority at this stage. And what would you say is next for Angelo? You know, you seem like you got bored at McKinsey, Goldman Sachs, you're in energy now.
You're saying if I'm bored already, Mark?
Is this going to be long-term for you, or is this, you know, you finish 8 Rivers, boom, you're done that project, Soleco is next. I mean, are you a kind of a chain entrepreneur, or what's up for you, or what's next?
I like building things. I mean, I like creating things. So I tend to get bored once things are steady state. And that's a classic thing that you find with a number of entrepreneurs. There's some people who love to manage. I'm not necessarily that person. I like to build. So Soleco Energy, you mentioned, is a new company that I've launched this year. It's still in energy. It's solar energy and storage, but what we're targeting is more the commercial and industrial market, what they call C&I. And so if you are a large industrial customer or company and you don't necessarily have the funds to finance and to go green, to go solar, that's something that we will plug that gap.
The financing.
Yeah.
And do you think, are you a brand builder or a business builder, or a little bit of both?
I think you have to be a bit of both in this world.
Did you create a brand? I mean, did you come up with a name for Soleco, or is it a marketing company?
So a 17-year-old from Campion came up with the name Soleco. I was trying to come up with names and I was struggling, and so I called my niece and said, hey, because she was a Campion at the time, can you ask some of your friends who are more creative than I am now to come up with a name? And so
did you throw some money out there, or you just said,
no, I just said come up with a name, and they just came out. They just came up with it. So Sol for the sun and Echo, economical savings. And then in terms of brand building, you kind of have to build a brand to build a business, because people want to know who they're dealing with. And I think that credibility factor, especially in the business where in terms of where I operate, if you don't have that credibility, people will not necessarily deal with you.
In your own house now, what's your favorite brand? Which one?
I still have a soft spot for 8 Rivers.
Okay.
I know there's an 8 Rivers Center in Ocho Rios as well. We did not steal the name from them.
Is it just?
It's Ocho Rios.
That's what it's based off of.
It's literally based in Ocho Rios. So we swapped it, put it into English, called it 8 Rivers. Even though it's a solar company, not a hydro project, a hydro company. But that's where we came up with it.
Sure. And I mean, are you in other sectors now? I mean, you personally, or is it just energy? Do you have some side hustles, some different businesses, or are you into some other things?
Well, I'm a part-time farmer.
Okay.
But that's on behalf of, because my dad, when he passed away, I inherited, along with my siblings, a farm in St. Anne. So
pigs, chickens, or is it livestock?
Livestock.
It's cattle.
Cattle. And I don't even eat meat.
And cattle prices are way up now.
I hope so. I don't think I'm getting those way up prices.
You're in a good trend now.
Yeah, or hopefully. But no, so we have cattle there really in legacy, in memory of my dad, and we've planted some cassava, but that's more of a hobby. It's hobby farming. But
are you selling cassava to Red Stripe, or is it just more?
We're trying to, yes.
Excellent.
Yeah,
okay.
Definitely.
All right.
So that keeps me. It's actually really good because it keeps you grounded. I think farming is a very grounded profession because you're at the bottom of the value chain for a lot of these vertically integrated groups, and when you have to negotiate with companies or customers who have far more leverage than you do, it reminds you to not forsake the little guy. You know, when you're doing your own negotiations, it's very grounding to be the farmer.
And with that said, I mean, what's the employment like at 8 Rivers? I mean,
so we, at our peak in construction, because it's really during that phase, we were only over 300 employees, direct employment, and hopefully there's a number of indirect jobs that we created. Steady state will be anywhere between 20 to 30 jobs, but because it's a solar plant, it's not as manpower intensive. But I still think a job created is a better job than not having a job.
Yes.
So that's really what we've done there.
Okay. And, coming back to the livestock, and how much did that whole experience, your dad's kind of mentor into you, again, make you into what you are today and teach you about life and business?
Interesting question. So I remember us having a debate, and this is when I just started business school. So we had a debate about what's the purpose of a company. Why do companies exist? And he kept saying, oh, it's to create employment. And in school, I'm like, no, they say it's to create profit. It's for shareholder return. He's like, no, it's employment. And then we both kind of realized it's somewhere in between and he influenced me that way to remind me it's not just about the profits, but it's also about the profit in your people and the key stakeholders in the company that will help it to be sustainable. So, I still remember that debate that we had.
And your dad fended off many takeovers, many interesting times.
I know.
So you must have very strong.
Yes, no, I've got to see that. And when he joined, he was actually brought in to undertake the company because he was an accountant. Yeah. And he realized and he helped turn it around. And so, no, that's definitely something to look up to.
Okay. And so any other sectors, any other things that you want to jump back into finance, maybe in the future? Finance
is in everything I do, even if it's dressed up as energy. If they put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. The energy business I'm doing is really a finance company.
Finance company, okay.
So I think for me, I can multitask, but I multitask within a singular focus. Yeah.
What, are you on a lot of boards? Have you been snapped up? Again, CEO of an energy company. Have you been snapped up by public companies or private companies in Jamaica?
So I'm on the board of GK UK, so Grace Kennedy UK Foods. I was on the board of GK Capital, but I stepped down as I was starting this new business, Soleco. I couldn't find the time. I'm also on the board of JN Money Services. So, and especially because I'm based in London, it's kind of cool to be on the UK side of the boards of Jamaican companies. It's a very interesting perspective.
Yeah. Okay, so two of Jamaica's biggest conglomerates have snapped up Angela. That's great.
Yeah.
And tell us about Soleco. Financing is just generally difficult in Jamaica. We still have the, BOJ Act where you got to have hard assets. The whole story of you got to have a car, you got to have real estate.
Right.
It's biological assets almost impossible. IP impossible. So Soleco will finance its solar parts, or is it the panels, or?
So effectively, it's a solar leasing model. So we will lease you solar equipment.
Okay.
So it's not truly. We're not a bank. We're not lending money. We're not issuing loans. But we basically are technical experts who will pull the project together for you, develop it for you, as it were, and we come with the funding as well, which gives the clients hopefully a peace of mind that the group that's developing it and building it is also a group that is heavily invested in it. What you find is that for some of the projects, they will just bring in someone to do the installation for them, and then that group leaves. And that's a model that works for some companies, but what we're finding for some of the larger customers that we're dealing with, because their operations are so key, the energy components is so key, they really want someone who is on the hook, as it were, if it doesn't work. And that's something that we believe we offer to them. And
what's the target market is large companies like hotels, or like what's the minimum size that maybe Soleco will go out for? Yeah, so we're geared more towards larger companies. I think that's where we can add the most value. So installations of larger than maybe a couple hundred kilowatts. Okay, yeah. Which is, for us, Business Live Extra, what are you talking about here? Is that 200,000 US, $1 million US? 2 million US? Around 250,000 US plus. Okay. But really, I think our sweet spot is anything when it starts to hit above $1 million, then you really have to think about that investment. Okay. And you have to really make sure that you're investing wisely. And that's hopefully where we come in, that we help those companies who are looking to adopt, and that we can basically write that check as well. Does Soleco have a war chest already, or is it kind of a pass-through where you're an intermediary, or? No, we have committed funds from an institutional investor. Okay. And we're hoping to surpass what they've committed. That means that we're growing, but we do have a committed funder. And does it just work? I call up Soleco and say, look, I have a business. I'm maybe break-even profitable. Energy costs are killing me. Yeah. And I just want to get an evaluation. We'll come in, we'll look at it. We do a rough evaluation for you, give you a sense as to what we could save for you. And then if you like that and you're interested, then we can move more towards doing the detailed work. And what do you think my light bill has to be for this to make sense for Soleco or for me? I need to be
hard
paying
to say, but
a couple of $100,000 whopping dollars, or for it to make sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it makes sense even at smaller levels, but if you want like us to be involved to help you with the development of it, it would probably make more sense if it's bigger.
Okay. And I mean, you know, Jamaica, just overall, you said it earlier, but really to resonate is, where do you see, you know, what else do you see adding on to Soleco and to the other companies? Any other plans in the works that you have right now?
I think for now we're focused on that sector, but we're opportunistic. So,
Okay.
and as I said before, I like to build and then kind of set it up and then move on. So we'll see what's next in a few years.
What stocks are you buying on the stock market now? What are you doing?
Say.
What are you doing with your money, or what are you investing in besides your operating company, your private equity plays? What else? What are you doing with your money on the stock market? Stock market's booming.
It is booming. To be fair, because my role is so risky, being a developer is very risky. I'm seeking like very steady real assets.
So real estate.
Real estate.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for for the Jamaican who, let's say, can't afford a piece of real estate, what do you tell that young lady, young guy?
Where should they put their money?
Yeah, let's say they
I
have
don't like giving investment advice.
Jamaican, $1 million Jamaican.
I'm a little bit nervous about giving investment advice to people.
That's a good answer.
No, it depends on their risk appetite. Depends on, I guess, general advice. Invest in what you understand, which is always an old school Warren Buffett rule. Make sure you understand it, and invest as much as you're willing to lose. That if it went away, you're not going to be, you're not going to feel too much pain.
What about Grace Kennedy's stock?
I can't say.
Do you hold some stock?
I can't say.
You're a connected party?
I can't comment on that one. You're a troublemaker, Mark. Good.
All right, good. That's it for another edition of Business Live Extra. Remember, success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. We've been talking with Angela Rainford, a green energy entrepreneur and business leader. Don't forget, you can watch us online at cvm.com/videos/Business Live Extra. Thanks for joining us.